which is Quo Vadis, which is another Italian historical epic. Not my favorite.
An Italian historical epic, aka so boring. Oh my god.
For the first half. The second half, I enjoyed quite a bit more.
Yeah. Uh,
Um,
I'm gonna have a hard time watching Cababria or next week. I'll give it an honest shake, but like, we've watched a couple of these movies recently, like The Fall of Troy and uh, L'Inferno to a lesser degree, where these
yeah,
Italians do big movies with no soul and no storytelling chops. It's just big.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is a very big film, especially in that second half.
Yeah.
One kind of interesting thing I read about it is that there's a lot of crowd scenes in this movie, and apparently they would have crowds of live actors at screenings come out for those to kind of bolster them even more.
Yeah. Part of the thing that was notable about this movie was that it was an event movie.
Yeah,
Because this was so long and such a big production, they didn't screen this at normal theaters, really. They opened it up in like opera houses and performing, arts stages, that kind of thing. So it had this kind of air of sophistication to it that I think a lot of other movies didn't at the time.
yeah. It certainly had a sort of I don't know, a sort of prestige, as it were.
Yes. Would
Um,
that it were
they
so
really
simple.
kind of sold it as
Hail Caesar.
they really kind of sold it as this sort of epic event thing that was just like it wasn't as much of a I don't know, it was definitely they were trying to attract the sort of the upper crust, I think, a bit more. And
Yeah.
um I don't really know for sure, but I kind of get the sense that it was sort of given more attention through marketing, maybe.
Hmm.
Of sort of like, see the greatest, moving picture ever made, that sort of thing. Um,
Yeah.
it was described at the time as a mammoth photo drama, which is great.
That's Ice Age, though, right?
Yeah, it's true. Um, I mean, this movie does get a lot of credit and is definitely sort of marked as a sort of a purely inspiring movie, more so than a groundbreaking one, I think. Sort of like people watch this and we're like, oh, okay, feature films of this scope and length are a viable option. This movie made a boatload of money. It was very successful in that sense. And so I think I think it sticks out, less so as for its storytelling and more so for the way that it sort of opened up, I guess, the market for longer films.
Yeah, for sure. That's true. It did kind of blaze that trail, especially in America, where longer films weren't as established or allowed. I
Yeah.
think the I think the MPCC actually broke down in 1914, the year after this,
Yeah.
which would put away all of those Edison era restrictions on how long movies could be and that kind of thing.
But yeah, all that being said, it doesn't really hold up so well. There's no good quality version of this film available anywhere, as far as I can tell,
No.
on physical media or otherwise.
Yeah. It's all
Um,
like 144p WebM
yeah.
files
Oh my
on
god.
Wikipedia.
And the actual story of it is, kind of typical Roman epic. A lot of Romans doing Roman shit,
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's
kidnapping,
like,
drinking wine,
I guess
that sort of
it's
thing.
it's like vaguely about, well, it's about Nero, or at least Nero is the antagonist. So, and it's
Yeah.
about like early Christians who are being persecuted by Nero, including there's probably the best scene of the movie is when they sick some lions on the Christians, and you see the lions like tearing flesh um, for
I mean,
for a brief moment.
you gotta love any movie that puts lions in it.
Oh yeah. There was
Um,
that the Roman orgy that Louis Fayard did a
yeah,
couple years ago, where that emperor just unleashed lions on his party because he was bored.
yeah. There's a lot of that sort of thing happening in this one. I mean, I didn't follow every sort of plot machination fully. There's a lot of, you know, scheming going on in this movie.
Yeah,
Um,
that no one
I
cares
kind of got
about.
I kind of got the sense that Nero decides to burn Rome because he kind of just feels like it and he wants to write some poetry. And he's feeling some writer's block for his poetry. And it's like, hey, how about I just burn the city down? I could write some poetry about
Yeah, and
that.
then he just watches the city burn. And he's like, ah, perfect, great of
Yeah,
my muse.
which is a great scene.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, like the first half is a lot of the scheming, a lot of the sort of like setting stuff up. And because of the sort of very kind of unsophisticated film language, I would say, simplistic film language that hasn't really evolved much. Um, uh, it feels kind of bland. Um,
yeah.
the first the first half, I was kind of in and out. I was like, oh man, this is kind of a chore to get through. Once the second half hits, it becomes Rome's burning. There's lions. There's fights. It gets a lot more interesting. Hiding in catacombs.
Yeah.
Um, all of the sort of big scale stuff happens in that second half. Um, the first half, there's actually a bit where the intertitle says Rome in all of its immensity, and then we cut to one room with like three people in it. Um, I listened to this movie with the Gladiator soundtrack over it, which did a lot to
Thank
help
you for
the
that
entertainment value,
recommendation.
I
Yeah.
think. Yeah, that did a lot to kind of bump up its entertainment for me. Um, I mean, there's a couple scenes that use kind of light and shadow in interesting ways. I think during the fire and during the scenes of the Christians who are hiding out in the
Yeah,
catacombs.
and tinting. I mean, we saw this in the
Yeah.
Nero movie from I believe 1908. But uh, putting a big orange tint to just sell that a whole city is burning, it works
Hmm.
really well.
Yeah. Just like the blue tint for night,
Yeah,
that is something that we still use in films as just like it's blue, it's nighttime. Like orange filter, just like there's fire, is still very much a thing. Like it's a little bit there's a little bit more to it now, but it's basically the same thing. Um, I mean, there's like a chariot race and some gladiator fights, which are fun. Um, so yeah, I mean, I can see why people watch this and were like, ah, bravo, such scale and panache.
I mean, it's attempting a type of seriousness, right? I think, uh, 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 I make the comparison to comic books in the 90s, and how movies right now are kind of desperate to be being seen as serious. Oh,
Mm,
comics in the 90s, video games in the 2000s, and how
mm,
I mean, I have made, I don't remember if I've said on the podcast, but I made the comparison of D.W. Griffith to Frank Miller, where, like, he's this extremely racist guy who loves just, like, darkness, and that's how he sells the seriousness of this new medium, is I'm gonna make everything dark and gritty, you know? Uh, and this movie is another kind of appeal to seriousness, where it's very
hmm.
stately and very grand, you know.
Yeah. Which is funny because I actually feel a lot of the grandiosity of this movie is so over the top that it makes it kind of comedic. Um, particularly, I think a lot of the performances come across that way. And just yeah, just the like the the sheer sort of like big. Everything is played so big. Um, at least Griffith tends to go for some subtlety in the performances
That's
occasionally.
true. When Griffith goes big, it means something, because
Yeah.
he's invested in character.
Um, Yeah, Quo Vadis is it's relying entirely on its scale to sell itself.
Yeah.